Here's what the Attorney General of the United States said today about the Justice Department's investigation headed by Robert Mueller of Russia's attack on our election.
I think our nation was turned on its head for 3 years. I think based on a completely bogus narrative that was largely fanned and hyped by an irresponsible press. And I think that there were gross abuses of FISA and inexplicable behavior that is intolerable in the FBI.
Chairing our discussion now is Chuck Rosenberg, a former senior FBI official and a former U.S. attorney. He was the former counsel to Robert Mueller at the FBI when Robert Mueller was FBI director. Chuck now hosts the MSNBC podcast, The Oath. And John Heilman is back with us to join this discussion. Chuck, your reaction to what you heard the Attorney General say today in that interview?
Lawrence, I'm mystified. Let me tell you why. But first, let me back up a bit and let me tell you what the Inspector General found, because the top line findings by the Inspector General are really important to understanding what the Attorney General said. The Inspector General found first that there was no political bias, no political motive, no improper motive in the FBI's investigation of Russian interference, nor in their opening of the case. And with respect to opening the case, that the predication was proper. Now, predication is sort of a fancy legal word. What it means is basically this. An FBI agent cannot open a case based on a hunch or a suspicion or a fevered dream or because she doesn't like her next-door neighbor. She needs some quantum of proof. She needs some evidence, a threshold. And we call that predication. And the Inspector General found that they absolutely had predication to open this case. So for the Attorney General to say that that is not true, that the Inspector General was wrong and the FBI acted improperly or didn't have predication or a threshold of evidence is just completely false. That's not what the Inspector General found. And the Attorney General offered absolutely no evidence other than saying so to rebut the Inspector General's findings. It's really mystifying.
What about when he says things like the Inspector General was limited to only talking to people who are employees of the Justice Department and the FBI, when we know in the Inspector General's report that isn't true? How can he say something like that?
Yeah, it's absolutely untrue. So here's the difference. When I was a federal prosecutor and I was working with a grand jury, I could compel people to appear before the grand jury. The Inspector General doesn't have that compulsory process, but he can ask anybody he wants to come talk to them. And often, and in this case, many people from outside the Department of Justice were asked. Some said yes, some said no. But the Inspector General clearly talked to people who were outside of the Department of Justice, outside of the FBI, and could approach and ask anybody that they wanted to. So, again, I'm mystified, I'm disappointed, I'm disheartened by the things that the Attorney General has said. He has characterized the Mueller work in a way that was untrue, and he has characterized the Inspector General's work in a way that's just simply untrue.
Let's listen to what FBI Director Chris Wray said today about the FBI's work.
Do you have any evidence that the FBI targeted the Trump campaign unfairly?
I don't.
And so, John Heilman, that got him referred to as the current FBI director in a Donald Trump tweet today where Donald Trump didn't like that one bit.
Can I tell you how much I admire and respect and love Chuck Rosenberg?
Because of his restraint and the way he handles these questions.
I do.
Yes.
I love all those things about him. He's a brilliant man, and he knows more about these things than I ever will. I'm not mystified by this.
I knew you were going there.
I'm not mystified by it in the least. The Attorney General, from the moment he walked into this job, has behaved as a ruthless, relentless political hack and a thug, and who has behaved not as the Attorney General of the United States. You're only mystified if you think that if you're still maintaining the fiction in your mind that he is an Attorney General in the classic mode of what an Attorney General has been in every administration of our lifetimes. There have been good ones, there have been bad ones, there have been some pretty bad ones. But what he did with he mischaracterizing the Mueller report is consistent with what he's done throughout. He made a travesty of the Mueller report, and he continues to lie on Donald Trump's behalf at every opportunity. And I think it's not surprising to me in the least, and I think the most terrifying parts about this are not just that he lies so gratuitously when asked whether Ukraine interfered in the election, and he says, I don't know, I haven't looked into that. Christopher Wray, the entire consensus of the American intelligence establishment, the Senate Intelligence Committee, Richard Burr, Republicans, everybody who has access and privy to high-level, confidential, the most top-secret intelligence product of the United States, which includes Bill Barr, knows there is no evidence that Ukraine interfered in this election. Yet Bill Barr continues to pretend, well, I haven't looked into it, I don't really know. He will say that Russia intervened. Good for him. But he continues to lie about this matter. And the most terrifying thing I want to come back to is this notion that this outside probe that he is running, he promised us that we could come to a crescendo of some kind this spring, which is telegraphing, given the political intent and the kind of political behavior that we've seen from him, that we are going to see Bill Barr trying to interfere in the American election come this spring when he's going to bring out a piece of a cooked investigation to try to advance Donald Trump's political interests. I would bet every dollar in my bank account that we're going to see that whenever this report comes out.
Yeah, Chuck, a quick last word about that. That was odd for the Attorney General to offer some timing on exact timing, as he did in that interview with Pete, about when this next report that he has commissioned by another U.S. attorney will come up.
Right. Real investigations, Lawrence, are done when they're done, not when someone requires them to be done. And by the way, I take John's point. The reason I'm mystified is because I've worked for and under many attorneys general from Democratic and Republican administrations, and I've just never seen this behavior. There's probably a better word for it, and I'll leave it to John because he's a lot smarter than me, but it makes me sad.
Chuck,
on that we agree.
Don't ever let John Heilemann put words in your mouth. Chuck Rosenberg, who John Heilemann and I both respect as highly as we possibly could, thank you very much for joining us tonight. John's going to stick with us. And when we come back, on the day the House of Representatives announced articles of impeachment against Donald Trump, President Trump gave the Russian foreign minister the White House meeting that the president of Ukraine was so eager to get when he was on the phone with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump said to him, I would like you to do us a favor, though. That's next.